Captain Adrian Voss stood on the bridge of the Dauntless, his fingers tapping nervously against the control panel. The hum of the engines echoed throughout the ship, but it didn't bring the usual comfort. Today was different. Today, they had captured an Amazonian warrior, a member of one of the most feared and respected races in the galaxy. The Dauntless had been on a routine mission near the border of Amazonian space when the attack came. A band of pirates had tried to ambush them, but the pirates were no match for the human crew. What came as a surprise was that among the attackers, there was one Amazonian, Teria, a warrior unlike any other. She had single-handedly destroyed half of the pirate fleet before her ship was forced to crash land on the nearby moon. Now she was here, locked in a cell on the Dauntless. Her hands were bound by energy cuffs that prevented her from using her immense strength. But that did nothing to contain the fire in her eyes. Teria glared at the guards as they stood watch, unflinching in her fury. She was a warrior, proud, strong, and capable of taking on armies alone. The idea of being captured, especially by humans, filled her with disgust. "Captain, she's not like the others," Lieutenant Clark said, his voice coming from behind Adrian. The officer was studying Teria from the observation deck. "She's different. There's something about her. I've seen it before in the most dangerous of soldiers." Adrian didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained on the screen displaying the image of the Amazonian warrior. The woman's long black hair, tied tightly behind her head, flowed like a river of shadows. Her muscular frame spoke of years of training and countless battles. Even in captivity, she held herself with a sense of dignity that could not be shaken. Adrian had known of the Amazonians and their fierce reputation. They were warriors above all else, with a strong sense of honor and duty. Teria was no different. She had surrendered, but it was clear from the expression on her face that this was a matter of survival, not surrender in the true sense of the word. She had been forced into a situation where fighting would have meant death, so she had chosen to live and fight another day. "What do you think we should do, sir?" Clark asked, sensing the captain's hesitation. "She's dangerous, but we could learn a lot from her. Her people are legendary." Adrian sighed, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "We can't just keep her locked up forever. It's not what we do. We're humans, Clark. We don't see the universe as just a battlefield. There has to be a way to understand her." He turned away from the view, glancing around the bridge. The crew was tense, aware that they had captured one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Some whispered among themselves, wondering what would happen next. Others, more practical, simply watched as their captain made decisions that could shape the course of history. Adrian was known for his calm demeanor, but this was a different kind of challenge. The crew had fought many battles, but none had faced an enemy like Teria. What could they do with her? What did the Amazonians want? Could humanity learn from such a race, or would they become just another group to be conquered, like so many others before? "Bring her to the command deck," Adrian finally said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of responsibility. "Let's talk to her, see if we can make a deal." The guards opened the cell door, and the moment Teria stepped into the hallway, her eyes scanned the area, looking for any sign of weakness. She knew they were watching her every move, but she didn't care. Her pride as an Amazonian warrior was the only thing she had left, and she would not let it be tarnished by a group of humans, no matter how many ships they had. She was escorted to the bridge, where Captain Adrian Voss was waiting. She didn't bow or show any sign of submission. Instead, she stood tall, her posture proud and unyielding. Adrian looked at her, taking in her appearance. She was a striking figure, tall with an athletic build that spoke of strength and grace. Her features were sharp, but there was an intensity in her eyes that made him pause for a moment. There was something about her, something that went beyond the fierce reputation of her race. "We're not here to fight," Adrian said, trying to gauge her reaction. "You've been captured, yes, but we don't treat prisoners like animals. We're not here to break you." Teria narrowed her eyes at him. And why should I trust you, human? Your people are known for betrayal, for exploiting those weaker than you. We don't see it that way, Adrian replied. We believe in the strength of unity, in forging alliances. You're strong, stronger than anyone I've ever seen. But maybe there's something we could learn from each other. Teria smirked, her pride shining through. Learn? From humans? I doubt that. Adrian felt a spark of challenge in her words, but he didn't back down. He had faced far worse in his career. We'll see. As Teria stood there, silently sizing him up, something changed in her eyes. There was a flicker of curiosity, a crack in the armor of her pride. Adrian saw it, and in that moment, he knew that this encounter was only the beginning. Teria's eyes never left Captain Adrian Voss as she stood before him in the command deck of the Dauntless. The walls of the room were sleek, polished metal, and the hum of the engines in the background created a steady rhythm that matched her thoughts. But it was the quiet tension between her and Adrian that filled the air. Adrian remained calm, a steady hand resting on the control panel in front of him. We don't want to fight you, Teria, he said again, his voice quiet but firm. We don't need to be enemies. Teria looked at him, her gaze sharp and full of defiance. She stood tall, unmoving, refusing to bend to the pressure of his words. She was a warrior of the Amazonian people. Pride and strength were her birthright. She had no room for weakness, and in her mind, this was nothing short of dishonor. You think I'll just accept your words? Teria's voice was cold, like the edge of a blade. I do not bow to anyone, especially not humans. We are warriors, not slaves. Adrian met her gaze with unwavering confidence. I never said you were a slave, he replied. You're strong. That's why I believe we can work together, instead of against each other. Teria's lips twisted into a small, mocking smile. Work together. You capture me, lock me in a cell, and then tell me we can work together. What is it you want, human? Adrian sighed, running a hand through his short, dark hair. He had known from the beginning that earning her trust would not be easy, but he was determined. I want to understand you, Teria. The Amazonians, your people are known across the galaxy for their strength, for their honor. I believe that if we can find common ground, we could achieve something great. The warrior's eyes narrowed, as though weighing his words carefully. She had heard of humans before, heard the stories of their rise from a small, fragile planet to becoming one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. Humans were strange to her. Their culture was so different from her own, so full of contradictions. They were a race that believed in alliances, in unity, something the Amazonians had never been interested in. Human alliances mean nothing to me, she said with a quiet force. We fight alone. We always have. That is the way of the Amazonians. Adrian raised an eyebrow. And look where that has gotten you. Struggling to survive against enemies that grow stronger every day. The galaxy is changing, Teria. You can either adapt or be left behind. Her hands clenched at her sides, and for a brief moment, Adrian saw the fire in her eyes flare brighter. He knew that he had struck a nerve. For all her pride, Teria was not blind to the reality of her people's situation. The Amazonian Empire was ancient, yes, but it had also been at war for centuries, constantly battling invaders, pirates, and hostile races. Their strength had brought them respect, but it had also led to isolation. Teria was a product of that harsh world. You think you can change us, she challenged. You think your human ideals can somehow convince me that you're right. Adrian was about to answer when the ship's communication system suddenly came to life. A voice crackled through the speaker, cutting through the tension like a knife. Captain Voss. Lieutenant Clark's voice came over the intercom. We've got a problem. A large pirate fleet has just entered our sector. They're heading straight for us. The sudden urgency in Clark's voice snapped everyone into action. Adrian's eyes flashed toward Teria. The captain didn't need to say anything. He knew that this was their chance. A battle was the one thing that would unite them, even if just for a short time. Perhaps it would be the key to earning Terria's trust. "Get to the command center, now," Adrian ordered, his voice sharp and focused. He turned back to Teria, his expression hardening. "You want to prove that humans can't fight like you. Help us survive this, and then we'll talk." Teria didn't say a word. She simply nodded once, sharply. There was no hesitation in her movement, no sign of fear. She was a warrior, and this was her calling. It didn't matter who the enemy was or where they came from. She would fight, and she would win. As Teria walked toward the door, Adrian followed, his mind racing. The pirates were coming fast, and they had no time to waste. The Dauntless was a powerful ship, but even it couldn't take on an entire pirate fleet alone. The crew needed Teria's knowledge. They needed her strength. The two of them arrived at the command center, where the crew was already preparing for battle. Teria stepped onto the bridge, her presence filling the room like an electric charge. She stood by Adrian's side, her eyes scanning the star charts and tactical displays with the sharpness of a seasoned fighter. "What do you think?" Adrian asked, glancing at her. Teria studied the pirate fleet's movements, her lips curling slightly as she noted their formation. "They're predictable," she said, her voice steady. "They'll try to flank us from both sides. We'll need to break their formation first." Adrian turned to the crew, giving orders based on Teria's analysis. The ship moved into position, and the crew braced for impact. Teria's strategy was bold, but it was exactly what they needed. Adrian felt a strange sense of confidence. He had no doubt that Teria's plan would work. She was a warrior. And now, for the first time, she was fighting for something bigger than herself. As the first pirate ships came into view, Adrian looked at Teria. "You were right," he said, his voice calm but filled with respect. "You are strong." Teria gave him a small, knowing smile. "You're not so bad yourself, human." The pirate fleet loomed ahead, their ships massive and dark against the backdrop of distant stars. Their weapons were already primed, and they were closing in fast. The crew of the Dauntless was ready, but the real test was still to come. Adrian Voss stood at the center of the bridge, his mind focused on the task at hand. The crew moved quickly, following his orders with the precision they were known for. But this time, there was something different in the air. It wasn't just the usual tension before a battle. It was something else. Something more. Beside him, Teria stood with her arms crossed, her eyes scanning the pirate fleet. She was calm, as always, but there was an intensity in her expression. She had seen many battles, fought many enemies, and yet this one felt different. It wasn't just about winning. It was about proving herself, proving that humans could stand alongside her. "They're not going to give up easily," Teria said, her voice steady. "But neither will we." Adrian glanced at her. She was right. The pirates were ruthless, and they had numbers on their side. But with Teria's knowledge and the Dauntless's firepower, they might just have a chance. "Helm, move us into position," Adrian ordered, his voice sharp. "We'll take the fight to them." The crew followed his instructions, the Dauntless shifting course to get behind the pirate fleet. Teria's plan was simple: strike fast, break their formation, and hit them where it hurt. But it required perfect timing. One wrong move, and they could be surrounded. Adrian's heart raced as the pirate ships grew larger on the screens in front of him. The first volley of fire rang out, and the Dauntless shuddered under the impact. But the ship held steady, and Adrian could feel the pulse of the battle through the vibrations in the floor. "They're hitting us hard," Lieutenant Clark called out from his station. "Shields are at 70%. Teria's eyes narrowed. She stepped forward, her hands moving to the tactical console as if the controls were second nature to her. "I know their movements. Prepare to fire on my mark." Adrian turned to her, his trust in her growing by the second. "You've got it. On your mark." The pirate ships were now in range. Teria's fingers danced over the console, setting the coordinates for their next move. She knew the pirates would attempt to surround them, But if they could break the outer line, they could escape and regroup. It was a risky move, but it was the best chance they had. "Now," Teria shouted, her voice sharp. In an instant, the Dauntless fired a barrage of energy blasts, ripping through the pirate ships. The sudden attack caught the pirates off guard, their ships scattering in different directions. But Teria wasn't done. She quickly adjusted their course, pulling the Dauntless into a tight spin to avoid incoming fire and line up for another strike. Direct hit. Lieutenant Clark exclaimed as another blast from the Dauntless tore through the hull of a pirate ship. The pirates began to retreat, but the battle wasn't over yet. The remaining ships regrouped, their weapons charging for a final assault. Adrian looked at Teria, his mind racing. "We can't let them regroup. We need to finish this now." Terria's eyes gleamed with a fierce determination. "Then we do what we do best, fight to the end." With a signal from Teria, the Dauntless launched a series of rapid-fire blasts at the remaining pirates. The Dauntless was a nimble ship, and its crew was sharp, but it was Terria's tactics that made the difference. She saw things before they happened, predicted the pirates' moves, and led the crew through every twist and turn of the battle. Adrian stood by her side, watching as the pirate ships exploded one by one, their weapons fizzling out as they were destroyed. The Dauntless was winning, but it was the cooperation between humans and Amazonian warriors that turned the tide. The final pirate ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The crew let out a cheer, their victory hard-earned. Adrian allowed himself a smile, but his eyes never left Teria. This battle had shown him something more than her skill in combat. It had shown him the power of unity. For all their differences, they had fought as one, and they had won. The bridge erupted in applause, but Teria stood quietly, her arms still crossed, her gaze fixed on the stars outside the ship. She had never been one for praise or celebration. For her, battle was simply what she was born to do. She had fought, and she had won. But there was something else in the back of her mind, something she couldn't ignore. Adrian approached her slowly, careful not to disturb her focus. "That was incredible," he said, his voice filled with respect. "You really came through for us." Teria didn't look at him immediately. Her thoughts were still on the fight, but she nodded, acknowledging his words. "Your people fought well," she said quietly. "I've seen many warriors fall under pressure, but your crew, they stood strong." It was the closest thing to praise Adrian had heard from her, and it made him smile. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were starting to understand each other. As the Dauntless cruised through the wreckage of the pirate fleet, Adrian and Teria shared a silent moment of understanding. They were different, yes, but in the heat of battle, they had found common ground. They had worked together, and for the first time, Adrian saw the potential for a future beyond just survival. There was more to this than just the fight. There was something greater waiting for both of them, something that neither could have predicted. The Dauntless sailed smoothly through the stars, its crew still buzzing with the adrenaline from the battle. The pirate fleet had been destroyed, but as the ship traveled further into deep space, a new sense of unease began to settle over the crew. They had survived the fight, but there was always a bigger danger lurking in the shadows of the galaxy. Captain Adrian Voss stood at the bridge's command center, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The stars seemed so far away, but there was something else, something closer. A new challenge was on the horizon, one that would test everything they had just fought for. "Captain," Lieutenant Clark's voice broke through his thoughts. "We're receiving a transmission. It's coming from Amazonian space. It's urgent." Adrian raised an eyebrow. Teria had made it clear that the Amazonians were not fond of their alliances. If they were sending a message, it could mean trouble. "Put it through," Adrian ordered. The screen flickered, and a familiar face appeared. It was an Amazonian officer, her expression cold and severe. Behind her, the grand banners of the Amazonian Empire waved in the background. "Captain Voss," the officer said, her voice filled with authority. "You have captured one of our warriors." "Teria," daughter of the great Commander Velas. We demand her return." The words hit Adrian like a punch to the gut. This was not a simple message. It was a demand, and it came from the highest echelons of the Amazonian military. Teria had been a warrior of great importance, and now her people were coming for her. "I understand your position," Adrian replied, keeping his voice steady. "But Teria is with us now. She has earned her place on this ship, and she's made valuable contributions." The Amazonian officer's eyes hardened. "You misunderstand, Captain. Teria's actions have dishonored her family and her people. She is to return to face judgment. There is no room for negotiation." Teria, who had been standing silently by Adrian's side, tensed at the mention of her family. She stepped forward, her gaze locked on the screen. "I knew this day would come," she said quietly, her voice calm but filled with a quiet rage. "I was prepared for it." Adrian glanced at her, surprised by the calmness in her tone. "Teria, what are they talking about? Judgment. What does that mean?" Teria turned to face him, her eyes meeting his. "In the Amazonian Empire, our honor is everything. If one of us is captured or surrenders, we are considered a disgrace. I've been summoned to face the Council of Elders. If they find me guilty, they will strip me of everything. My title, my name, my life." Adrian's heart tightened at her words. He had known that the Amazonians valued strength and pride, but this was something deeper, a code that went beyond battle. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. If Teria returned to face her people, she could be condemned to a life of exile or worse. But if she stayed, would the Amazonian Empire consider her a traitor? "We can't just let that happen," Adrian said, his voice firm. "Teria has proven herself here. She's one of us now." Teria shook her head. "You don't understand, Captain. This is my fate. I have no choice. I must go." But Adrian wasn't ready to give up. He had seen Teria's strength, her pride, and her loyalty. She had earned her place among them, and he couldn't allow her to be abandoned to the cold judgment of her people. "I won't let you face them alone," Adrian said, determination burning in his eyes. "We'll find another way." Teria looked at him, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. She had always been taught that humans were weak, that they could never understand the Amazonian way. But Adrian's words, his commitment, struck something deep inside her. "Captain," she said quietly, her voice softer now, "you are not my enemy, but you cannot change what is." Adrian clenched his fists, frustration bubbling within him. He had faced many enemies, many challenges, but this was something different. This wasn't a battle he could fight with weapons or tactics. This was a matter of honor, and Teria's fate rested in the hands of her people. The communications officer interrupted, his voice tense. "Captain, more ships are coming into our sector. They're large and heavily armed. They're not pirates." Adrian's heart sank. "What are they?" "Amazonian warships," the officer replied. "They've entered our space. They're headed straight for us." The tension in the room shot up like a lightning bolt. Teria's people were here, and they had come for her. Adrian turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of resolve and concern. "Teria, are they here to take you back?" She nodded, her face hardening. "Yes. They won't stop until I am with them. And if you refuse to hand me over, they'll destroy this ship and everyone on it." Adrian's mind raced. There had to be a way to avoid a confrontation. The Dauntless was strong, but it couldn't face an entire Amazonian fleet without devastating losses. He had to think quickly. There had to be some way to resolve this without losing everything. "Prepare the ship for battle," Adrian ordered, his voice cold with determination. "But I'm not going down without a fight. We'll buy some time. And Teria, we're going to find a way to make sure they don't take you without a good reason." Teria's eyes softened at his words, but there was still doubt in her heart. She had no illusions about what was to come. The Amazonian fleet would not back down, and they would see her as a traitor, a disgrace to their people. But Adrian had given her something she hadn't had in years: hope, hope that there was more to life than the strict rules of her people. And maybe, just maybe, she could change the future of the Amazonians if she had the courage to stand by the humans who had come to trust her. As the ship prepared for the coming storm, Adrian and Teria stood side by side, knowing that a new chapter was about to begin. And this time, the battle would be for something bigger than survival. It would be for the future they could create together. The Dauntless was preparing for the inevitable. The Amazonian fleet was closing in fast, and the crew of the ship was bracing for a fight that none of them truly wanted. The peaceful silence of space was now filled with tension and uncertainty. Every officer on the bridge knew that this battle could determine the fate of their ship and their lives. Captain Adrian Voss paced back and forth, his hands clasped behind his back as he thought about their options. The communications officer had confirmed it. Amazonian warships, equipped with the finest technology, were heading their way. Their mission was clear: return Teria or face destruction. But Adrian had already made up his mind. He would not give up Teria without a fight. Teria stood beside him, her arms crossed as she watched the star charts on the large screen in front of them. She had been quiet since the transmission from her people, her expression unreadable. Adrian could sense the internal struggle she was facing. The Amazonian Empire valued honor above all else, and Teria had broken their laws by joining the Dauntless. But in her heart, she knew that she was not the same person who had left her home. "Are you ready?" Adrian asked, his voice steady but full of concern. Teria turned to him, her gaze sharp. "I have no choice. I can either go back and face their judgment or fight alongside you. The choice is clear." Adrian looked at her, impressed by her resolve. He had expected her to be torn, but she had made up her mind. Despite the centuries-old traditions of her people, she had chosen a path that would unite her with humans, even if it meant breaking every rule she had ever known. "There's no going back now," Adrian said softly. "We fight together, as one, no matter what happens." Teria nodded, her gaze hardening. "I won't let them take me without a reason, and I won't let you or your crew suffer because of me." As the Amazonian fleet grew closer, the atmosphere on the Dauntless grew even more tense. The crew was preparing the ship for a possible attack. The weapons systems were being checked, and the shields were charged. The air was thick with anticipation. Every single person aboard knew that their skills, their courage, and their unity would be tested to the limit. Lieutenant Clark looked up from his console and turned to Adrian. "Captain, the Amazonian fleet is entering weapons range. We have about 5 minutes before they open fire." Adrian nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. "Teria, are you sure you want to do this? There's still time to hand you over to them. We could avoid this battle." Teria's eyes flashed with determination. "And let them take me back in chains? No, if this is the price for my freedom, then so be it. I will fight." Adrian's heart clenched at her words. The bond between him and Teria had only grown stronger since their first meeting. She had become more than just an ally. She had become a trusted partner in the fight for their survival. The Amazonian ships were now within range. Adrian could see them clearly on the view screen. Massive vessels, each brimming with firepower. The Amazonian fleet was here to reclaim Teria and make sure she paid the price for her dishonor. But Adrian had a different plan. "Clark," he said, his voice commanding, "prepare to engage. But I want us to be smart about this. We'll use their size against them." The crew sprang into action, coordinating their efforts as the Dauntless shifted into position. Adrian's plan was risky, but it was the only chance they had. The Amazonian ships were big, but they lacked the maneuverability of the Dauntless. If they could outsmart them, they could buy themselves time to figure out what to do next. The first blast from an Amazonian ship struck the Dauntless's shields, causing the ship to rock violently. The crew held steady, quickly recovering. The shields held firm for now, but Adrian knew they couldn't take many more hits. "Return fire," Adrian ordered. The Dauntless fired back, its weapons targeting the larger Amazonian ships. Energy blasts flew through space, striking their targets, but the Amazonian warships were well armored. The damage was minimal. "We're not going to take them down easily," Lieutenant Clark said, his voice tense. "They're too strong." "We don't need to take them down," Adrian replied, his voice cool. "We just need to keep them busy long enough to escape." The crew was focused, each member working in perfect synchronization. The Dauntless dodged incoming fire, darting between asteroids and debris fields to make it harder for the Amazonian ships to target them. The battle was intense, and Adrian could feel the weight of every decision. But he knew that they had no other choice. The Amazonian fleet was too powerful, and a direct confrontation would be a disaster. "We're almost through their perimeter," Adrian said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Keep the pressure on. We're getting out of here." Taria, standing by Adrian's side, kept her eyes fixed on the view screen. The Dauntless was moving quickly now, pushing through the asteroid field as the Amazonian ships struggled to keep up. Adrian could see the frustration in their movements. They were strong, but they were not fast. They would lose this battle if they tried to chase the Dauntless through the dangerous field. "We're going to make it," Adrian said, almost to himself. Taria didn't speak. She was too focused, too determined. But in her heart, she felt something she had never felt before, a sense of belonging. She had fought for herself, for her people, and now she was fighting for something bigger. She was fighting for freedom, and for the humans who had shown her a way to change her destiny. The Amazonian ships finally stopped pursuing, realizing the Dauntless had escaped. The danger wasn't over yet, but they had bought themselves time. As the crew breathed a sigh of relief, Adrian turned to Taria. "You did it. We made it out." Taria looked at him, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. "We made it out together." The Dauntless cruised through space, its crew taking a brief moment to rest after the chaos of the battle. The Amazonian fleet had given up the chase, but the weight of what had happened still hung heavily over the ship. They had won the battle for now, but Taria's future was still uncertain. The crew knew that their fight was far from over. The Amazonian Empire would not easily forgive her defection, and the damage to their reputation could bring even more enemies. Captain Adrian Voss stood in the ship's command center, looking at the star charts in front of him. He had known from the start that there would be consequences to bringing Taria on board, but he hadn't expected the full wrath of the Amazonian military to descend upon them so quickly. The crew had proven their strength, but now they had to think ahead. What would happen when the next fleet came? Adrian had no illusions. The Amazonian Empire would send more ships. Taria had been important, and her departure would not be forgotten. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that something bigger was at stake. This was about more than just Taria's fate. It was about the future of humanity and the Amazonians. "We need a plan," Adrian said aloud, his voice quiet but firm. Taria entered the room quietly, her presence commanding but not overwhelming. She had been by Adrian's side throughout this entire journey, but now she was a warrior in limbo. Her people saw her as a traitor, but she had no place with them anymore. The Amazonian Empire had betrayed her long before she ever stepped aboard the Dauntless. "I know you're thinking about what comes next," Taria said, breaking the silence. "I can see it in your eyes." Adrian turned to face her. "I'm thinking about our next move. We can't keep running forever, and I can't allow your people to keep chasing us." Taria nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. "My people won't stop until they have me. That's what they do. They've been trained to hunt down those who break the laws. I know this. But you don't belong to them anymore," Adrian said, his voice softer now. "You belong with us. You've shown us what loyalty, honor, and strength really mean. We need you." Taria's eyes flickered with emotion, but she quickly pushed it aside. The truth was that she had no place to go. She had burned her bridges with her people, and despite her warrior spirit, she could never go back. The Dauntless was the only place where she felt truly free. "What are you suggesting?" Teria asked, her voice steady. Adrian leaned against the command console, his arms crossed as he looked out at the stars. "I'm suggesting that we find a way to make sure that we're not just running from the Amazonian Empire. We need to find a way to create a new path forward, one where humans and Amazonians can coexist, not just fight." Teria regarded him for a moment. She had fought for her people her entire life, and yet she had seen the truth. Her people were trapped in a cycle of pride and violence that prevented them from seeing beyond their own walls. She had once believed that the Empire's way was the only way, but now she saw things differently. "Do you really believe that?" Teria asked quietly. "That humans and Amazonians can coexist?" Adrian's gaze never left the stars, but his voice was filled with a quiet conviction. "I do. You've already proven that. We've already started something. You, me, my crew. Together, we've made it through impossible odds. We've got the chance to change everything. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take sacrifices." Teria stood beside him now, looking out at the same stars. "You're right. It will take time. And sacrifices. But maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something different." There was a long pause, the kind of silence that stretched between them, heavy with the weight of the future. The Dauntless glided through the endless black, carrying them away from the threat of the Amazonian fleet for now. But Adrian knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. The Amazonian Empire was proud, and their enemies had always been quick to destroy anyone who threatened their way of life. The Dauntless surged forward, its engines roaring as it moved with lightning speed through the stars. The Amazonian fleet, massive and imposing, was spread out before them, each ship brimming with firepower. But the Dauntless was faster, darting between asteroids and debris fields, making it nearly impossible for the larger, slower ships to keep up. "Target their engines," Adrian ordered. "We don't need to destroy them. We just need to disable them." The Dauntless fired its first shot, a burst of energy that struck one of the Amazonian warships. The ship shook, its engines faltering as the Dauntless continued its rapid movement, dodging incoming fire. The Amazonian ship wasn't destroyed, but it was temporarily disabled, giving the crew a brief window to move on to the next target. "This is working," Lieutenant Clark said, a hint of relief in his voice. "We've taken out their main engines on one of the ships." Adrian smiled, but his focus remained sharp. "Keep it up. They're going to come at us harder now. We need to stay one step ahead." The battle raged on, the Dauntless darting in and out of enemy fire, its crew working in perfect harmony. Each blast from the ship's weapons was calculated and precise, aimed at weakening the Amazonian fleet without engaging in a full-scale fight. The strategy was risky, but it was their best chance at survival. Teria stood by Adrian's side, her hands clenched in fists. She could see the Amazonian fleet starting to regroup, their ships aligning into formation. They were trying to anticipate the Dauntless's next move, but Teria knew that this was their chance to end the battle. "They're getting ready for a final push," Teria said, her voice low but certain. "We need to finish this now." Adrian nodded. He had been waiting for this moment. "All hands, prepare for a final strike. We're going to give them everything we've got." The Dauntless surged forward once again, its weapons firing at full capacity. This time, they weren't just disabling engines. They were targeting the heart of the fleet. Energy blasts ripped through the Amazonian ships, and one by one, they began to fall back, their formations breaking apart as they struggled to defend against the relentless assault. The Amazonian fleet was weakening, but Adrian knew that the hardest part was yet to come. They still had to face the flagship, the largest and most powerful ship in the fleet. It was heavily armed and well defended, but the Dauntless had an advantage. It knew how to outmaneuver its enemies. Teria's eyes narrowed as the flagship came into view. "Let's finish this," she said, her voice filled with determination. With one final burst of energy, The Dauntless darted toward the flagship, its weapons blazing. The flagship tried to retaliate, but it was too late. The Dauntless struck, and the Amazonian ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. Its shields finally breached. The remaining Amazonian ships hesitated, their command structure shattered. One by one, they began to retreat, leaving the Dauntless standing victorious in the emptiness of space. "We did it," Lieutenant Clark said, a smile breaking through his tense expression. Adrian turned to Teria, his eyes filled with respect. "We did it. You did it." Teria stood tall, a fierce pride in her eyes. She had fought not just for her freedom, but for something greater, an alliance between humans and Amazonians, built on strength and respect. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hope. "We did it together," Teria replied, her voice strong. As the crew of the Dauntless celebrated their hard-won victory, they knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but they had proven something important, that by standing together, they could overcome even the greatest of odds. And with Teria by their side, they had begun to build a future where both humans and Amazonians could thrive. "Captain," Lieutenant Clark's voice came through the comms, breaking the silence. "We've got a new message. It's encrypted. It's from someone in the higher ranks of the Amazonian military." Adrian tensed, and Teria's face darkened at the mention of the Amazonian military. They both knew what this could mean. "Put it through," Adrian said, his voice calm but firm. The screen flickered, and an Amazonian officer appeared, his posture as rigid as always. His eyes were sharp, calculating. "Captain Voss," the officer said, his voice laced with authority. "You have been given mercy, but that mercy is not infinite. You have two choices: return Teria to us, or face the consequences." Teria's expression hardened at the officer's words. She had known this moment would come. The Amazonian Empire was giving them a choice, but there was no real choice at all. If they didn't return Teria, the Empire would make them pay. "We will not give her up," Adrian replied, his voice resolute. The officer's gaze narrowed. "You misunderstand. The Empire does not negotiate. You have made your decision, and so have we." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only the ominous silence in its wake. The room was still, and for a moment, no one spoke. It was clear now. There was no turning back. Teria stepped forward, her gaze fierce. "Let them come. We'll fight for our future, together." Adrian looked at her, his respect for her growing with every word. "Together," he agreed. They had made their choice. The Dauntless was their home, and they would defend it, no matter what it took. The Dauntless was ready. The crew had worked tirelessly to prepare for the confrontation that was now inevitable. The Amazonian Empire had made its intentions clear. They wanted Teria back, and they were willing to do whatever it took to reclaim her. Adrian Voss, the captain of the ship, stood on the command deck, staring out at the stars. He could feel the weight of the moment on his shoulders. The crew, Teria, and the future of both humans and Amazonians rested on the decisions they made in the next few hours. The crew members were at their stations, their faces set with determination. Everyone knew the risks. The Amazonian fleet was powerful, and it wouldn't be long before they arrived to challenge the Dauntless once again. But this time, Adrian had a plan, a way to turn the tide in their favor. "We can't run anymore," Adrian said, turning to his officers. "We have to face them head-on. But we'll do it on our terms." Teria stood beside him, her posture straight and proud. She had already made her peace with the idea of fighting for her freedom. She was ready, not just to defend herself, but to fight for the future she had begun to build with Adrian and the crew of the Dauntless. For the first time in her life, she was fighting for something bigger than herself. She was fighting for a world where both humans and Amazonians could coexist in peace. Lieutenant Clark stepped forward, his face grim. "Captain, the Amazonian fleet has entered our sector. They're close, too close." Adrian nodded, his voice calm despite the growing tension. We've been preparing for this. The Dauntless is faster, more agile. We can't go toe-to-toe with them in a direct fight, but we can outsmart them. Terria's eyes flickered with understanding. The Dauntless had always relied on its speed and maneuverability to escape danger, and this time would be no different. They wouldn't stand their ground. They would use the terrain around them to their advantage, striking quickly and then disappearing into the vastness of space before the Amazonian fleet could retaliate. They'll underestimate us, Adrian continued, but they don't know the Dauntless. We know how to move, how to fight with precision. We're going to hit them hard and fast, and then we'll be gone before they even know what hit them. The crew began to take their positions, preparing the ship for the fight of their lives. The Dauntless had proven its worth before, but this time the stakes were higher. Terria's fate was on the line, and they would fight for her, for the chance to forge a new future. As the Amazonian fleet loomed closer, Teria could feel the familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins. The Amazonian warriors were among the most skilled in the galaxy, but she was no longer the person they once knew. She had changed. She had become something else, something stronger. And now she was ready to fight, not just for herself, but for the people she had come to call family. The first ship is in range, Lieutenant Clark called out. We're ready to engage, Captain. Adrian took a deep breath and nodded. Let's do this.